Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Corey Thornton. I am the Managing Editor for Market Intelligence at Open Minds. Today, as part of our weekly executive web forum series, Open Minds Senior Associate Joe Naughton-Travers and Centerstone Chief Marketing Officer Debbie Cagle will discuss cautionary virtual tales, transformation lessons learned for call center operations in a pandemic. Before we get started, I have a couple of housekeeping reminders. While your audio is muted for today's briefing, we are prepared to make this an interactive session. If you have any questions at any time during today's web forum, please put those questions in the GoToWebinar question box. Joe and Debbie will be glad to answer you. Also, the slides and recording for today's briefing will be available on the Open Minds website starting tomorrow. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Joe.
Thank you, Corey. Debbie, it's great to see you. Debbie's in Nashville. I'm in Chapel Hill, North Carolina here. I'm going to introduce the topic a little bit and then really turn it over to Debbie to share her story. Debbie, it was just over a year ago that you and I were talking about this exact subject as the nation shut down due to the pandemic. So again, our topic here is cautionary virtual tales, transformation lessons for setting up a call center during the pandemic. So yes, let's stop on the agenda slide here. I'm going to talk a little bit about the broad notion of customer service and where the concept of a call center fits in with that. And then really be turning it over to Debbie to share her story at Centerstone, telling us a bit about Centerstone, how she set up the call center and the contact center tools. And then we'll really have a discussion of all the things that relate to that. So again, if you have questions at any point, put them in the question box, and Debbie and I will pay attention to those with the help of our colleagues in the background. Next slide. So we spend a lot of time now in the industry talking about customer service. So customer service isn't just providing good services, but it's also making it easy for consumers and family members to access care. So generally speaking, when we're talking about quality access to care, it's usually pretty instantaneous. We want to make it easy for individuals to find us and to get their first appointment set up. And obviously during the pandemic, we've seen organizations really need to shift rapidly to virtual care. Certainly everyone did it within days or weeks last March as they really shifted. And the notion of a call center, a central call center, really fits in with that kind of virtual care delivery, as well as a way to access for care in a face-to-face way once we're able to do that again. So I'm really interested in having Debbie share her story about what they did at Centerstone, because I know it has been long part of her vision to get this centralized call center into place. So Debbie, I'm going to pop off the video and let you take over and tell the story. Oops, Debbie, I can't hear your sound. I think your audio may be off.
I was just saying, thank you, Joe. I was just saying thank you for having me today and allowing me to share a little bit about our journey, which we're still in the midst of. I'm going to just start with a little bit about Centerstone. Next slide, Corey. So I took a few slides out of our calendar year report, our annual report. And so if you want to see the whole thing, you can go to centerstone.org. So for those of you who don't know, Centerstone's a multi-state provider. We offer 22 service lines ranging from a hospital to residential centers to traditional outpatient mental health and substance use to a broad array of community-based services. We also offer specialized services for our military and their families, and for medication-assisted treatment, addiction services, and some IDD services. Within the health system, we also have a research institute and foundation. Next slide. You can see these are the numbers we had during the pandemic. This is how many people we served, how many services we provided, and the number of staff we have. on board at Centerstone. Next slide. Just some of our numbers in terms of locations, facilities. Next slide. And then probably no surprise, as a born out of being a community mental health center across our footprint, 53% of our revenue, 45% of our revenue is Medicaid, about 25% is state agency, and then you can see the other breakdowns, which I'm assuming participants in this webinar will be have access to these slides. Next slide. So to start the conversation, take you back before the pandemic and Centerstone in January of 2020, we were operating already about 40 locations that delivered telehealth services, abiding by all the restrictions around guidance regulations coming from the federal government and from each of our states. 70% of our staff already had laptops in use, and we already had a cloud-based electronic health record and enterprise resource planning systems like our general ledger and human resources tools. Next slide. Obviously, we all know the pandemic hit in 2020. So Centerstone immediately, overnight, we made the decision to take all of our staff home that we could. So we took about 3,000 staff home. We had another 1,000 staff that were essential workers remained on site. And at that point, we, like everybody else, struggled to get PPE. But our goal was to keep everybody safe. That was our primary goal in mid-March. We went from about 500 telehealth services delivered per day, and later in March, we were delivering over 5,000 telehealth services per day. Next slide. Fast forward to a year later, and we still have around 1,000 or so essential workers in place on site. And I looked yesterday, and we are now at about 1.5 million telehealth services delivered in the last 13 months. Next slide. And just to note, about 52%, those 1.5 million, and today about 52% of the services that we are delivering are via telehealth. And we see that continuing on. So now to talk about the contact center and this presentation. So as you can imagine, as community mental health center providers, a great deal of access to services came through walk-in traffic, in addition to using our phones and some traffic coming through our website. The pandemic, probably like most providers, threw us into a chaotic situation with everybody, whether that was an active patient or somebody new seeking services, and some of our staff even calling, only having access to us via the phone. At that juncture in March last year, we had numerous decentralized phone numbers, and if you went to our website, you saw in excess of 100 phone numbers. And they were all ringing. Many did not get answered. They went into rabbit holes, and many backing up for extended periods of time on hold. As a health system, again, our priority was safety, but secondarily, we turned to reaching out to and delivering services and to the people, to our active patients, and then starting to deal with all the patients, all the people coming at us that needed services. So I'm not going to read this whole thing, but again, you can see that pretty typical at the time. Our services and setting up appointments were all client or either clinic centric or service centric. Everything we had was paper based, or we had on an Excel spreadsheet. We had a great phone system, but there was no transparency around the metrics and the analytics that we could ascertain from our phone system. Our intake capacity was overwhelmed. That was all going on internally. Externally, we had people who were sitting on hold writing horrible online reviews about us. At one point, we had to take down Google review access. It got so bad. Our call volume was increasing exponentially. Click to call and Google search volumes were pretty much non-existent at that time. And we were struggling with the amount of time it took to schedule an appointment because many of the people that we either served or new people, or the new clients, new inquiries coming to us needed great tech support. Next slide, Corey. So, spring of 2021, here's where we are today. And we're not finished with our work. Our goal is one call resolution and to be efficient and helpful, whether Centerstone ultimately provides a service to the caller or not. That's ultimately our goal. So internally today, we have centralized one phone number. And it's a phone number. It's not call center software yet, but it's one phone number. So for all of our outreach, social media, anything that we put in writing, when people call us, we encourage anybody calling that wants to schedule an appointment or make inquiry about services to call our one centralized phone number. To better manage all of our phone numbers within Centerstone, we have done a couple of things. First of all, we did a big lift to clean up the phone numbers and the addresses and services associated with each of our locations, even though those locations are not open, such that when a person seeking services Googles mental health or an applicable word, we pop up on the Google map now. We want to be high on the map, and people today can click to call us, and or they can go to our website. They can also find more easily a phone number. But we had to do all that cleanup to make the searches more productive in terms of people finding us and being able to get to us. We redid all of our phone trees, as noted here. We redid our voicemail messages. We also used our analytics to right-size the number of call agents that we have available at any, particularly during business hours, to answer the phone. We're measuring after hours and weekends. We're not fully staffed yet to handle those phone calls. We also standardized training materials across all of our agents as a support for starting to go down a path to standardization and efficiency. We now are working on our culture such that instead of being service or clinic centric, because we're using telehealth as a vehicle to deliver services, we're now able to schedule more from a regional standpoint and even statewide. We're not totally where we want to be yet, but we've made a big improvement. I'm going to show you in a minute. We also built a tool such that using our Cisco phone analytics, we now have on-demand metrics that are being used throughout leadership and management. And we've done a number of initiatives working to expand our clinical capacity so we can disposition those phone calls. And last but not least, we also trained up and set in place a Connect Center tech support. We have a dedicated team now of people that sit next to our call agents that reach out to the new intakes, our new customers, and work with them to make sure that they know how to connect and use Zoom or the telehealth platform in a particular location. They make sure that they have good audio, connectivity, and then they do a warm handoff to our clinicians, making sure that that connection happens at the time of the appointment. That has gone a really long way to transform our use of telehealth. Next slide. I'm just going to show you a couple of samples of tools that we stood up in the last year. Next slide. So early on in the pandemic, we started pulling out analytics metrics to share with leadership and management. And this is a snapshot of a tool that we developed that was pulled manually every day from our analytics, and we did a push email to get it out so the data could be used. This is a roll-up of our four state call centers, and it takes you back to before the pandemic, where you can see in January, February, early March, we would average, the blue column, we would average about 700 inquiry phone calls a day. This is taking out people calling to reschedule appointments with their therapist or asking for the pharmacy or asking to speak to somebody in administration. These are inquiry phone calls. So we were getting about 700 a day. As you look into the summer months, you can see that the volume of calls was climbing. Today, we are getting on a daily basis always over 1,000, and one day this week it went to like 1,600. So the volume has not backed off. The orange columns represent calls handled. So that delta between the height of the blue bar and the column and the orange column tells you how many phone calls were abandoned or that we didn't handle. So we know how many people called us. We know how many we handled. And we also were tracking, obviously, as a core metric, abandonment rate. The gray column tells you intakes and how many, and as a placeholder, trying to figure out how many of our calls manifest themselves in an intake, which is a whole nother conversation around capacity and availability. Next slide. This is where we are today. We have an on-demand Qliksense report. So if I want to go into and see right now, I can go in and I can click on the health system. This is just a snapshot from last week of the whole enterprise. I'm still tracking the metrics of calls presented, calls abandoned, calls handled, but now I can also track more easily abandonment rate. I can see average speed of answer. So in this particular day, you can see that for fiscal year going back to July 1st of this fiscal year, last year, 2020, to now currently, for the whole health system, we're running, it's still taking us almost 2 minutes on average to answer the phone. And that's on average. Abandonment rate is now at 17%. Our benchmark's 10%. And you can see for this year so far, we've had about 231,000 inquiry phone calls. The great thing about this tool is that if I operate in one state with one of our call centers, I have all this information available to me down to the agent, and I can click to look at a single day. I can look at a week. I can look at all kinds of trending, and also I can look and see how many of my agents are on ready, how many are working, how many people are in the queue trying to get in, and I can also see evenings and weekends data also as we're looking at staffing for those hours. Next. At the local level, state level, this is just one example of data that we pulled, and I threw the slide in just showing year over year the kinds of trends we have in call volume, and also wanted to make a note about out calls. Because people leave messages and because there's a lot of reason to have to touch base back with a person calling, like getting their consent forms filled out and verifying insurance, we have almost as many or more out calls, and it's obviously an important metric, and the time that it takes to do an out call is an important metric as you're looking at staffing your call center. Next slide. I threw in this slide, obviously our reputation is important to us, and our chaos and the improvements needed at our front door were driving those negative reviews. So as part of our reputation management and doing the cleanup and the improvements we've been doing, we also watch these metrics very, very closely. Patient feedback scores are really important to us. One of the things that we added as part of our functionality is that today we're working with Binary Fountain, who is a reputation vendor, and after each of our telehealth sessions, the patient is given the opportunity to score us with stars, and it ultimately becomes a 1 through 5 star rating. You can see in the lower right-hand column where we stand today, and this was as of February's report. We're at 4.3 in terms of access scores, 5 on quality, which we're really proud of, and we have about 62% satisfaction when it comes to receiving services using telehealth. I'll also note that if you look at the omni-channel contacts, today Centerstone still primarily operates using phone as our main access point. People do fill out forms. It's called a Connect with Us form, and you can see just from December to February how much we've grown in terms of people trying to connect through our forms. Are we where we want to be yet? No. No, we need to add additional self-help tools and to truly be giving the customer experience that we want to give. Next slide. What's on the horizon for us? Well, first of all, just a quick anecdotal example. Bringing these tools forward and constantly reviewing with leadership the trends and the importance of access using our phones. I got a note yesterday from one of our CEOs who I knew and have talked to, that she uses these metrics every morning in a management team meeting. Every morning they look at their these KPIs. And she noted that last October, her abandonment rate for her state business unit was 24%, with almost a 4% average speed of answer. As of this week, the abandonment rate is 3%, and they're answering the phone within 15 seconds. You have to know, that made me very proud that we were able to bring very useful tools and processes and training and improvements such that we're getting those kinds of results now, and ultimately fulfilling our noble purpose of delivering care, changing people's lives. So now, on the horizon, what's next? Recently, I had somebody say to me that one of our patients said, I don't want the kind of care and the care delivery that my parents or my grandparents want. So we're looking at, as we move forward with the pandemic and into our future, we're continuing to look at hybrid models of care. Many people will not go back to wanting on-site or in person, while many people will. We are examining right now functionality for a call center platform, true call center software, much like big companies use outside of the healthcare space, like Amazon and others, so that we can plug in self-help tools. We see a day when we'll be able to offer chat and online scheduling, that when somebody calls us, if they're an active patient or they've called before, we'll readily recognize them by the information that pops up on an agent's screen. We want to make accessing care at Centerstone as easy as possible. We think that is the customer that we have today and the customer of the future. Adding value. The very next step in this journey is that we are starting down a path to look at CJM, which is customer journey mapping. We want to map every touch point from the time someone clicks a button, makes a phone call into Centerstone, all the way through to their first interaction with us, and then concurrent interactions. And we want to know the cost. As I sit here today, my mind goes to a place that would say that journey today is probably pretty costly. So we're looking at how to become more efficient, and we're looking at standardization across our health system. Metrics. We're bringing more and more metrics to the table. The most recent one is agent readiness. We know right now across the health system, our agent readiness score is at a little more than 50%, needs to be at 65%. It's kind of like measuring clinician productivity. And we want to do the best job we can in putting in place best practices for Connect centers. So we're investing in our future. As demand and capacity are at odds, we're having to invest in our future. Agents, additional clinicians, software upgrades. As everybody on this phone call knows, Medicaid is highly attractive, and we have more competitors than ever for our public sector business. And we want to continue to position our brand as customer friendly and high quality care, and serving our stakeholders well. And last but not least, if I heard once, oh man, over the last year I've heard over and over again that Hobby Lobby is paying $17.50 an hour, and our agents weren't making anywhere near that hourly rate. So we have adjusted compensation. We're doing more in terms of training. Obviously, there's a lot of stress associated with this job. We are working with our agents to feel valued and let them know that they are important contributors to our noble purpose and the work we do. And we are, and the other thing we did was, as we work from home, we built redundancy in equipment in case we have equipment failures. But also a future on the horizon goal is to have redundancy across agents, so that if a system goes down or somebody wants to take a vacation, we have redundancy and backup. With that, Joe, that's kind of a quick, I can go on and on, but that's kind of just a quick snapshot of a little bit about our journey, and that continues on today.
Yeah, no, great. Corey, you can pull down the slide so that Debbie and I can see one another. Debbie, thank you so much. It's, as you know, you and I have been doing work over the last year related to parts of this, and I know that you have had this vision of getting, call contact center in place. And you certainly, the pandemic certainly gave you the opportunity to make that happen more quickly. Some discussion questions though. Help me with all of the challenges related to technology at the front end, because when I start thinking of what you've been telling us about for the last half hour, I think, oh well, we have to have all the phones, we have to have a electronic health record or scheduling systems, or the analytic tools, or the clinicians need their laptops and cameras and all that sort of stuff. Give us some sense of what you guys wrestled with. I know you mentioned early on that you did have a number of things already in place because you were doing telehealth pre-COVID, but not everyone else was. So tell us a bit about the technologies that you guys are using, as well as where you still wrestle with them a little bit.
So, Joe, in terms of technologies, are you thinking telehealth platforms specifically, our electronic health record and various instances of the record in terms of scheduling, phone systems? where to start? So, as you're aware, we have been using telehealth platforms for a number of years because we're so spread out. We needed both telehealth functionality for delivery of services, but we also needed a way administratively to be more efficient in our meetings across our footprint for the whole organization. We started probably a year before the pandemic. We moved what was early functionality to Zoom, and for everything televideo. And so we were fortunate that we already had that platform in place. Now we had to do additional cybersecurity kinds of work to make sure that we weren't being cyber bombed, and that we could assure our patients that truly their PHI was being protected. So we did a couple of things. A couple of our states have consistently used Zoom. We tried another product that didn't work, so we went back to Zoom. We're also now doing a pilot with MD Live, and we're white labeling that platform specific to commercial and non-Medicaid business. So that involves standing up licensed clinicians and putting profiles online, and patients can do their own scheduling and use a credit card to pay. That's an early initiative for us that we're trying today. Are we totally resolved that Zoom will be the go forward platform? No. So we're still working on that. If you think about access to appointments, was probably our greatest Achilles heel, because people called. They called a call center where they were sorted into people that needed to have verification of insurance and benefits, and we had to work with them to get them scheduled into appointments. But many of our patients could be redirected to a local office because of our size. We have lots of convenience in terms of those local offices. So a great deal of the intake work and appointment setting was not technology driven. People walked in and got appointments. That threw us into a lot of chaos when all that traffic now was coming through the phones. So where we are today is that we are looking at a call center software platform and one platform that we all share, a platform that will connect with each of our 4 instances of our electronic health record, a platform that would enable scheduling to take place with the entry of some patient characteristics, the kind of symptoms that you're presenting, the kind of clinician that you think that you would relate to, a clinician that has the ability, that's licensed in a particular state, such that the system would tell us not only our clinicians who are available, but what their appointment availability will be. We went from, walking down the hall and asking for an appointment from a clinician to today.
Yeah, and I think it's important for our audience to understand, because the notion of how people would like it to work is that we have one single electronic health record with the scheduling capability in it, and your call center agents would be able to go into that and look for a woman who's covered by Blue Cross in Florida, but the reality is that's not where you guys were. You have 4 different electronic health records, and they're being used slightly differently in your jurisdictions. Your regions were handling or are handling scheduling a little bit differently from one another. And so you were trying to build on top of that this 1-800 call Debbie notion. And it's hard for folks to understand how complex that was to wrestle with. The scheduling thing, I imagine, is one of the most complicated things, aside from making sure we have enough capacity for the volume of calls, and you certainly have been addressing that with your key performance indicators and monitoring that. How is the scheduling happening now? If I call the 1-800 number, does the agent then connect me to the local region, or how do we eventually get to that one call notion that you really have the vision for, but you don't have all the pieces in place quite yet?
Today we have much more that centralized such that our agents can see appointment availability.
Okay.
And so we have much more online capabilities. So, because remember, our agents are all working from home. They're not sitting in a clinic. They're not walking down the hall and saying, Joe, can I have this block time on your schedule next Tuesday at 2? So there's much more transparency around all appointment availability, and for a state, not just associated with your clinic or your southern region or western region of the state, but for the whole state. It took a bit in our culture for people to our staff to think statewide and outside their own region, but we now have transparency into that. For our tech team who works across our states, they have access to all 4 instances of our EHR. Is that cumbersome? Yes, because they have to log in to see those schedules and availability. They have to log into each version. That's part of where we're going next, is to resolve and stand up software to resolve that issue so that all schedules sit in one place. The other thing to note is that with new software capability, we would not only have data related to those who become active patients, we need all the data that comes from people who don't become active patients. We want to know what services are being sought, where those people live, because it gives us marketing information to know services that are needed in specific geographic areas, which we can then give to operations as we're looking to scale and grow. That's helpful?
Yes. How many, give me a rough sense of how many agents do we have on a typical, at least during business hours? Are we talking 5 agents, 25, 30? I have no idea what the number of folks you have that are answering these 800,000, 1,600 calls a day. Obviously, it's more than one person.
Oh, yeah. So amazingly so, thank goodness for these people, we have around 25-ish.
Okay. So around 25. And those are just scattered wherever they happen to be, wherever they happen to live or work. Or are they located near your central office in Nashville?
It depends on the state. Most people in Tennessee reside in Tennessee. For our Illinois operations, almost every agent, because they're supervised from here. Some of them live in Illinois. I think one lives in Florida, and one lives and some of them live in Tennessee. And so with each of our organizations, there's more people within their state, within a state region, but we're starting little by little to see the migration of people moving elsewhere, and they can work because they're in queue. Remember, they all have a total setup with headphones and connectivity and monitors and laptops from wherever they are, wherever their home is, and they're in queue. So, you're on the East Coast, I'm in Nashville, you and I could be in the same queue, and our supervisor can monitor us to see our talk time, if we're in not ready state, if we're at lunch, and how many phone calls are backing up in our queue. So all
Sure.
That's automated for us.
Sure. I do want to remind our folks in the audience that are with us live, if you have questions, put them in the question box on the GoToWebinar panel. I do have one question from the audience. Debbie, describe the typical credentials or skill sets you're looking for in an agent, because I'm thinking of this person as they need to be able to handle the clinical aspects of the call, the screening, and I could be fairly distressed possibly. But then, and I don't know if the agents are doing it or whether it's being passed on, there is the sort of fiscal screening too. Does Joe have Blue Cross? Does Joe have Medicaid? So, give us some sense of what credentials and then what training you're doing for these agents before they get dropped into your call center operations.
Our agents have a wide variety of backgrounds, and we have people who have to us from Verizon and other call center experiences. They typically do not have clinical backgrounds. If you'll remember, Joe, we also have crisis call centers and crisis capabilities in all of our states. So if somebody calls and they are indicating they're in a crisis, we do have a warm handoff protocol for those people. That's not we do not train our people to do crisis debriefing or to try to clinically somehow handle those phone calls. We gather a certain amount of information, and generally the kinds of work that happens to verify insurance happens outside of this group of people. We're pretty efficient in terms of our telephone scripts and how we train people, and training for us is anywhere from a week to 2 weeks, plus which includes shadowing. And our functionality today includes the ability for quality checks and supervisory checks, listening in on phone calls, particularly new agents, and to make sure that they are able to handle the stress, because you can imagine that people calling us looking for services, there's no telling how many other providers they've already called, how long they've been on hold. They're not always able to contain their stress or their frustration. So it's a stressful job for our agents. And so training is really important. Supporting them. I don't know if you remember or not me telling you, but during the year last year, Centerstone, as a benefit, got the premier version of COM for all employees to download onto our just in case you can use
audience, that's CALM, CALM, the sort of meditation relaxation app or tool. If you didn't understand what Debbie was referencing there. Yes, I use a different one, but I certainly understand the need for it. I use Headspace. But in addition with the staffing, what I found fascinating when you were showing us your various KPIs or the metrics and what the benchmarks are for the industry. And I think that, for some of us as particularly behavioral health providers, we're not used to thinking in those terms of metrics. It's the same kind of thing that one would expect if I was calling Land's End or Delta, that the calls have to be answered within X number of seconds, not X number of minutes. Very closely tracking abandonment rates. Getting a sense of, okay, how many referrals really did convert to a visit? Those are that was your intake bar on your chart there. If you've hired folks that have worked in call center like settings, they would be very accustomed to those kinds of metrics. But I would imagine that for folks that you were training that might have a different background, it might take a while to get used to that, because that's a really I mean, you know exactly how long I'm on the phone, how long it took me to answer, how many rings there were. It's intensive monitoring. How does
Mhm.
staff react to that?
Uh, well, we at Centerstone enjoy lots and lots of metrics. I think in the beginning there was it created noise that, oh my gosh, we're going to declare now metrics around this kind of functionality. I'm sure that amidst a pandemic and everything else that was going on, that it presented yet another stressor.
Mm,
Coming forward to today with training and ongoing review of metrics, it's a tool that's meant to help us to improve. It has helped us to add more agents so that those agents who were with us in the smaller format earlier now have more colleagues to help take
mm,
the pressure off. It has it's exposed things like outgoing phone calls that we would have not considered. We were only looking at incoming phone calls, which also speaks to stress and strain and how much time
mhm.
people are having to phone. So for us, I think it's been a good thing, even though in the beginning it could have been eyes rolling and people thinking, "Oh man, here's one more here's one more thing we got to deal with." I think
That's
it's
right.
been
That's right. Debbie yells at me and says, "Joe, it took you 7 seconds to answer that call." Well, but
no.
the other thing is because we're talking about this in terms of ease of access and customer service, but I really do want to point out that that one chart I particularly like that showed the calls answered in the intakes, and what the gaps were between the calls coming in versus the calls that were answered, essentially measuring the abandonment rate. This isn't just about access and customer service. This is about revenue generation or lost revenues. If we have 200 calls in a day that either get abandoned because it takes too long, or we're not able to respond, those are 200 consumers that might come in for an initial intake, and those numbers really start to add up very rapidly. So the tools are also really about, and you certainly described the explosive volume that you've had in this service area, but those metrics also help exactly with that, which is, okay, well, if I get 2 more call center agents, and it costs X dollars to have them, with benefits and salary, would I be able to get those the abandonment rate down and essentially generate the revenue that we're missing by not being able to have as easy access?
That's absolutely on target. That is absolutely, because now that we can show the number of phone calls that are hanging up, and uh, we know at what second they hung up. We know how long people are holding on, and these are not just inquiries, but they're also our referral sources,
Mhm.
calling from probation and schools and other places, hospital discharges. We know, and and you could speculate that people call and get a wrong number. Well, not so much. When you're doing click to call, you're doing a Google search, it comes up as Centerstone. So, but we actually give leeway. We throw those out, but very quickly, it's not hard to convince um, the leadership that, like you said, another agent, 2 agents, 5 agents, uh, helping us to help people to get to services, first of all, also represents revenue and reputation. That's what metrics have done for us, and we use our metrics for improvement. Our agents are busy, they're stressed. So I can't imagine that we're calling up and saying, Joe, You were on the
To get
phone
that
for yeah, you've got 10 people in that queue, and what were you doing? Well, we know what you're doing. We know
yeah.
that you're handling somebody who's stressed out, and you're trying to find an appointment for them, or you're trying to get their information so you can call them back and work them into an appointment where there's a change and we have an opening.
Well, Debbie, we're getting close to the end of our time here, and I need to let Corey come back on for a moment. But if you were going to give, some sort of final word of advice to providers that are really looking to get this central call center stuff in place, what would you tell them in terms of, what's the most important thing to initially focus on, or any other advice that you think would be helpful?
Assessing where you are today, making sure you have a really good view into what that patient journey looks like today.
Mhm.
And then starting to break down those component pieces to get to your ultimate goal. And
Sure.
And that's where we've been that's where we are now on that journey, is as we scramble to the early objectives of getting our staff safe, whether that was PPE in a clinic or home, getting everybody functional and serving our patients. Today, it now is that journey of that customer experience. So I think would be, my brain's swirling, but I think that would be really standing.
Sure. Now,
That
and I've had something that you've stressed a whole lot, which is you used measurement throughout this process to help problem solve and get it better. Even at the beginning, when you had huge abandonment rates, you knew it, and so I would also stress to our audience the importance of using measurement as you're implementing these kinds of really large strategic endeavors. But listen, I need to let Corey come back on. Debbie, it's great working with you. We can both stay on screen. Corey, I know you wanted to pop on and had some closing comments for us.
Absolutely, Joe. Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Debbie. I also want to thank Christy Hoskinson, our general manager, who is working behind the scenes today. Before we get on down the road, I just want to share next Thursday, we're here every Thursday at 1 p.m. Next Thursday will be Emerging Models for Integrated Whole Person Care. That starts at 1 p.m. on April 15th. It's going to feature Dennis Freeman, Chief Executive Officer of Cherokee Health Systems, and Teen Hanson-Turton, President and Chief Executive Officer of Woods Services. For those of you who have Elite memberships, I just want to show you again where we're at on our website. If you go to the Open Minds front page under events in our nav bar, at the far right-hand side, it says Executive Web Forums. When you go to that page, you will see all our upcoming executive forums, as well as all our executive forums, which we record on demand. With that, I'd like to also remind you that starting tomorrow, this video and the deck will be available on the Open Minds website and available for download. Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Debbie.
All right.
Thank
Take
you,
care,
Corey.
everyone.
Bye, guys.